All right. Welcome to the cranial bones. There are 8 cranial bones. We'll go over each of them individually, some of their landmarks. Let's get right into it. This is the frontal bone. Remember your terms. Frontal means forehead. The frontal bone articulates with a lot of bones, actually. Articulates with the sphenoid, the 2 parietal bones of the coronal suture. Makes up the superior portion of the orbit, articulates with the maxillae, and the nasal bones. Take an inside look here. You can see it also articulates with the ethmoid bone. Next is the parietal bone. There are 2 of these. There's a left and a right. The parietal bone makes up a huge portion of the cranium. Makes up the lateral and superior cranium, or at least a large portion of it. Don't think it has any foramen or anything special like that, but it does connect with the occipital bone to create the lambdoid suture. Next is the occipital bone. It's the back of the skull. Makes up a large portion. There is a ton to remember about this. So first, this little arch here. That little ridge is where muscles attach to the neck. Now you can also see right here, that's where the brainstem will sit. I deleted Atlas so you can't see it, so that you can see the foramen magnum here. But yeah, big hole. Then here, these smooth parts are called the occipital condyle. They have articular cartilage that allows it to have less friction when it's pressing against Atlas. You can also see inside these little holes here. See all its landmarks. The hypoglossal canal. I believe there's a nerve that goes through there. The jugular foramen. Right here. You see, there's a good 4 foramen canals that run on either side. Alright, next is the temporal bone. There we go. Temporal bone. The temporal bone is a little weird. It has this long process here. A process is any part of a bone that sticks out to articulate with another bone or another part of the body. So this is called the zygomatic process, or the temporozygomatic process, and it connects with the zygomatic bone. The temporal bone also has the external auditory meatus. It's where your ears go. And it leads inside to the internal auditory meatus. It's basically where your ear goes from the outside to the inside to connect with the brain. Now there are a couple processes here. This right here, this little needle looking thing, very fragile. It's called the styloid process. Remember styloid because it looks like a stylus, the needle of record. Then this right here is called the mastoid process. If you feel behind your ear, you can actually feel that sticking out. And this inside, you can see right here that this is a very thin part of the bone right here. This is called the squamous portion of the bone. That's why if you're a boxer, you always try to hit them in the temple, the temporal bone. You can knock them for a loop pretty easily. Then right here is the petrous portion of the bone. It's one of, if not the thickest part of the skull. It contains, like we said, the internal and external auditory meatus. All right. We're getting there. Next up is the sphenoid. I'm going to hide all the others just because I think this looks, people say it looks like a bat or a butterfly, but I think it looks more like a mask. So the sphenoid's a little bit tricky just because of its odd shape, but there are a lot of different features to this. So there's two sets of wings. There's the lesser wing here, and then there's the greater wing. You can see the greater wing kind of fans out to make up part of the lateral portion of the skull and part of the orbit. It makes up the back of the orbit here. This is called the superior orbital fissure. And if you kind of get down a little bit, you can see right here, this is called the inferior orbital fissure. It doesn't make up the entirety of it, but a good portion of it. Then you see here these petrigoid processes. Down. Actually, let's learn more about those. All right. So we can kind of see here how it makes up the back of the orbit. You can see the inferior orbital fissure, the superior orbital fissure. And now this on the inside. So these right here are called the optic canals. So that's where your optic nerve comes through. Now this little seat right here, is a really important gland that sits right here called the pituitary gland. Mine actually does not work. So, this is called the sella turcica, and it's just a little kind of pedestal for the pituitary gland to sit on. Now you can see all these little tons of foramen that run through here. The superior orbital fissure runs right there. The sphenoid crest is right there, kind of makes up the back part of the nose. Trying to make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Sphenopalatine suture. Okay, so this is where your sphenoid meets the palatine bones to make up the back portion of the palate. Then all the foramen we were talking about earlier. Oh, where did it go? Oh, this thing. Okay, so I believe this right here. Well, that's the optic. No, that's the optics now. I believe this is the foramen rotundum. Then the foramen ovale, and then the foramen spinosum. Or no, spinosum's over here. Okay. Not that I really think you need to know that. I'm just being overly detailed. Next is the ethmoid bone. My least favorite. This weird little monster makes up a lot of the sinuses and part of the nose. This is actually the creates the base of the septum of your nostrils. So you can see it here. So there's actually these two little parts over here. These are your middle nasal concha. And you can see that the ethmoid beats this bone right here. It's not part of the cranial bones, but it's called the vomer. Helps create part of the septum. And you can see there's a lot of free space in there. Back in here, there's actually a part in the frontal bone right about here that is a hollow cavity to your sinuses. The ethmoid is one of those ones that you really have to play around with, because it's one, if you see a real skull, it's very, very fragile, so it's really hard to preserve them, and a lot of the models don't look a lot like it. So from an interior view, you can see a lot of spongy bone here, and you know how earlier we said that it makes up a large portion of the nose and sinuses. It's its main job. There's actually the nerves that work with your nose to sense smell sit right here. That's why there's a lot of spongy bone there. Your trabecular bone, whatever you want to call it.